Hey everybody, I'm excited to be here. My name is Franklin Sarkett, and today I'll be talking about building a data-driven organization. This is about scaling my business 150-fold with people, processes, and tools. So currently I'm the co-founder and CTO of Audantic Real Estate Analytics. Before that I was a Facebook data scientist, and before that I was a high-frequency trading quant. So at Audantic, what we do is we predict if homeowners are going to sell their house within the next 6 months to an investor. And then so our clients are highly competitive residential investors who are looking for an edge in doing their marketing. So they're looking for off-market deals, stuff that other people are not necessarily looking at, and then they do direct marketing to contact the owners themselves. So our product is used in over 250 markets across the country, and we're growing every day. So scaling 150-fold. So basically what that means is we started the business with one client, a MacBook, and a CSV file. Everything was ad hoc. So started with, after a few months, we were able to deliver a data set to our first client of the 20,000 people that were most likely to sell to an investor. So that client went out, they did some direct marketing, they got some leads, they closed some deals, and we were able to basically get some word of mouth from there and grow our clients. Over the last 4 years, we've grown the business through people, processes, and tools, but not in that order. Tools are the foundation of data science, and the processes are what help us become more automated, but we all know that data science that isn't repeatable isn't really data science. So hence the focus on the tools and the processes. So the way that I approached it was starting first with the tools, picking the right things to be using, Python being the main tool. From there, we added in processes so that we were going from ad hoc, one-off work to consistency. And then once we outgrew that, we started adding more people to the team and growing and innovating on the tools and the processes and the people, and it became a nice feedback loop. So starting with the tools, Buckminster Fuller said, if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. So the concept here is that by choosing a tool, by using a specific tool, we're actually giving up control for speed. And so that's really the essence of using the right tools. You basically can free up the cognitive load of making continuous decisions and gives you way more space to be creative. The tools actually enforce a certain way of thinking that when you're using the right tool, the thinking follows with that. So as an example, we in the team started using Black, which is a code formatter. And it sounds like a kind of a trivial example, but basically what we were able to do is have a uniform code style. So I'm sure a lot of people have read Google has their own coding style, and they have a document, and you read it, and you learn how they like to format their code. Well, this basically removes all that, and it says there's only one way to format your code. You run it through Black. It's always outputted the exact same way. The name was actually from Henry Ford, where he said people could have any color of car that they wanted as long as it was black. So basically what Black says on their website is, by using it, you agree to cede control over the minutia of hand formatting. In return, Black gives you speed, determinism, and freedom from PyCode style nagging about formatting. You will save time and mental energy for more important matters. So the biggest benefit for us was actually when we were starting to do pull requests and everybody was formatting their code with Black. Instead of there being diffs where certain lines of code were changed, but it was really just a formatting, the diffs became way smaller, way faster, and much easier to understand. So as we were building out the tools stack for our product, each tool that we chose really kind of enforced a certain way of thinking and taught us something that we didn't necessarily know beforehand. So these are some of the tools that we use on a daily basis, and sort of like the category, what the tool is, and what we learned from it. So just digging in, I would say that probably one of the more powerful tools that we also use is Airflow. And so we've gone through a few different tools and iterations using Luigi, using Jenkins for some automation, and kind of cobbling together a system. But Airflow really enforces a way of thinking and approaching data engineering with a highly opinionated framework, right? You have to use Airflow the way that they created it. I would say an anti-pattern for tools is bike shedding. It's also known as Parkinson's law of triviality. So the example that's given is that if you're designing an atomic nuclear reactor, people will wind up arguing more over the color of the bike shed where they're going to park their bikes as they're going there rather than the actual heavy weighting, the more interesting and harder issues, because it's easier to grasp what color you should choose. So you don't want to spend too much time on the tools. The tools sort of like are important, but it's very easy to have a ton of arguments over which framework to use and all this stuff. And it's not always that important. So there's the, hence why it's an anti-pattern. Okay. So next we move from tools to processes. W. Edwards Deming. So he was a statistician and consultant who was actually credited with a lot of the Japanese economic miracle of the 1950s. And so basically, one of the quotes that he has is, 85% of the reasons for failure are deficiencies in the systems and processes rather than the employee. The role of management is to change the processes rather than badgering individuals to do better. So he has another quote that I really like: a bad system will beat a good person every time. So the more ad hoc your process is, the easier it is for it to break, the easier it is to forget steps, the easier it is for it to not be repeatable. And we all know repeatability in data science is essential. If you can't get the same result twice, it's not clear, which one was right. What changed? What are you doing differently? So the focusing on the process is the next step. So on day one of the business, I was basically a mechanical Turk. So there's this story of a chess playing machine that toured around Europe in the 18th century. And they used the machine to play against Napoleon and Benjamin Franklin, and the machine kept winning. Later, it was revealed and discovered that there was actually a tiny person inside the machine playing. So what looked like this incredibly complex machine that could think and do all these things was really just a person. And so that was, in a lot of ways, what this business was. It was me cobbling together lots of different processes and tools and outputs and things like that, making it look like it was a software product. But every day I came back to work thinking about, how do we automate this? How do we turn this into a process? How do we write code to connect the dots? Things like that. So these were three things that I focused on for our processes. First was a tool called Process Street, and this is a great tool. It's a place where you can actually write down your processes and create checklists that are dynamic. And then you can, for example, for onboarding a new client, every time you onboard a new client, you run a new checklist. It has inputs, outputs, and it steps you through like what you need to be doing. Second is OKRs. So Google is very famous for using OKRs. It was popularized by the venture capitalist John Doerr, and it stands for objectives and key results. So it's beyond goal setting, which a lot of people have goals. Goals can only kind of get you so far. You actually have to break down how you're going to do it, and that's what the framework of OKRs really provides you with. And then finally is the concept of minimum viable product versus minimum viable feature versus minimum viable change. So, everybody starts with the idea, we're going to create this minimum viable product. It's actually not granular enough. So I'll go through each one of these. So basically on the verge of burnout, I decided to write down what I was doing and just document it, right? Especially if we were going to add anybody for me to train them, it was going to be so much easier if I wrote down all the steps that I did. But this was before we even had any more data scientists, so I personally just documented my own process, turned it into a checklist, and started onboarding clients by using Process Street, and it really reduced the brain damage. I wasn't forgetting steps. I didn't have to go back and repeat and fix mistakes and stuff like that. And so the other huge benefit was that my co-founder stopped asking me, like, where are we? Like, is it done? How much longer? Like, he could log into Process Street and see we were on step 7 out of 12. So it added communication, it added repeatability, all sorts of things. I highly recommend Process Street. So moving on to OKRs. So this is objectives and key results. And this is a quote from John Doerr. The objective is what I want to have accomplished. The key results are how I'm going to get it done. The objectives are typically longer lived. They're bold and aspirational. Their key results are aggressive, but always measurable, time-bound, and limited in number. And so when we were starting, we had this idea of what we wanted to do, what we wanted to accomplish, but making it actually measurable was challenging. And we didn't really have a framework for it, so we kind of kept having the same conversation over and over again, like, what are we going to do today? And basically, you can break down the OKRs into 5 benefits. So the benefit is, it's this acronym FACS. So the first one is focus. You kind of decide beforehand, like, what are we going to focus on? The last speaker said one of the things that kills a startup is not knowing what you're focusing on, right? Like, there's too many things to do, and so you start chasing your own tail and you get all distracted. Next is alignment. Everybody is kind of on the same page. You don't have to have the same conversation of prioritization every day. We have prioritization in the form of alignment. Commitment, people can just say, like, I'm not going to work on that, or I'm going to work on that, but either way you get buy-in. And then you have tracking. So the metrics aspect is huge, because you can actually say how close you are to your goal. And finally, stretching, you can make your goal more aggressive, and you can track and see, like, if you're making it too aggressive or not. So another concept is that every model should have a single target metric. So we all know that there's all sorts of different ways to measure a model. You can do AUC, you can do F1, you can do precision or recall. And so when you start looking at too many metrics, it's really hard to compare your model, even against itself, with different data sets, with different periods of time. So having something that gives you a uniformity in how your model is performing is pretty essential. So for actually using the OKRs, how we did it was, we said we want to create a model to predict who is most likely to sell their house. So that's the objective, and that's what the client wants. It's something that's a little bit more qualitative. The key result, and our single metric, is the percentage of houses that sold that we captured in a portion of the list. So we said we wanted to capture 80% of the sales within the highest 20% probability of the data set. And so the reason we use that metric instead of something like AUC is that AUC optimizes generally over the whole data set. So if you're getting better, predictions at the back end of the probabilities, that doesn't really help you when you're cutting it off at the beginning. Our clients don't want to talk to everybody. They can't afford to. And if they could, they wouldn't need us anyway. So we're trying to give them the smallest sliver of the data set, the 50 people that are the most likely to sell their house. And so that's why we chose this metric. And the metric really has to be custom to, like, what you're trying to accomplish in a business sense. So using AUC would have been, it would have been okay, but it wouldn't have really helped us know how on target we are. Another OKR that we had was that we wanted to automate the labeling of the data for building a model. So all sales were not equal to us. There were certain people that were selling retail with a realtor, stuff like that. So we were trying to remove those from the data set, but they're kind of harder to identify. We were looking for a certain type of transaction that an investor would be able to buy the house, actually add value to it. So a lot of our clients are flippers, or they're landlords, they want to take a house that's being underutilized, really, invest some capital into the house, make it a better product, and then either sell it or rent it to people. So that required actually a lot of labeling. And the more clients that we added, the bigger our data set that we were trying to train over, because we were trying to train over Florida and California and Illinois and Texas. And so you get very different data across these markets. So we needed to label data from each one of these local markets. So we just started getting into real scale problems. So the objective was automate the labeling. It's much harder than it sounds. And so basically the key result was that we wanted to be able to relabel by hand 100 rows in 10 minutes. So I think that's like one every 8 seconds or something like that. But to do that and to know like how we were doing in terms of the automation and the scalability of this, we just timed ourselves. Like, how long was it actually taking us? How do we bring this thing down? And then we figured out, the GitHub issues and tasks of, platform tools and all that stuff. But this was what we needed to do. This is what we figured out our capacity needed to be. And then we could back out the actual tasks that we needed to do because we were measuring it against this metric. So we actually built a little bit of an active learning platform with a human in the loop. So we built a model to predict the label, and then we took the labels and we built the predictive model without knowing the answer, right? So in the active learning, you can cheat. You can say, this was a good deal or this one was not. Now you have your label data, and then you can put it into the model afterwards. So does that make sense to everybody, the active learning part? Okay, and then the third process that we really tried to harness was the MVP versus minimum viable feature versus minimum viable change. And so the reason for this process and how we approached our workflow was that speed really matters, size matters, and what I mean by speed matters is Mark Andreessen said, cycle time compression may be the most underestimated force in determining winners and losers in tech. And so cycle time is how fast you can go from idea to delivering value to the client. And so if it takes you a super long time to deliver a ton of value, that's okay. But if you can deliver less value quicker and iterate, this chart, which I stole from GitLab, shows that where you think, so the straight line is to where you think the solution is, and in the bottom right, it's where the solution actually was. And so you start tracking that way, and as you make smaller and smaller changes, you realize you're not really on the right track. And so the way that you can accomplish that is through the idea that size matters, which is like the ostrich versus the hummingbird. Hummingbirds are really fast, and larger changes are fraught with a lot of risk. So if you're only releasing your product once a year, you're not going to get a lot of feedback. If it breaks, you got a big problem, and it's really hard to wind stuff back. But if you're releasing daily or weekly, you're going to get a lot more feedback, and you're going to be able to learn a lot more from how the clients are using the product, et cetera. So that's processes. Finally, we come up to people. So at a certain point, one person can only do so much. You need more people. 5 people can only do so much. And so Steve Jobs said, great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. We all know that. We all work on teams and companies. But on the other hand, he said, I noticed that the dynamic range between what an average person could accomplish and what the best person could accomplish was 50 or 100 to 1. So given that, you're well advised to go after the cream of the cream. A small team of A+ players can run circles around a giant team of B and C players. So when I was trying to build out the team and, we kind of had a blank slate, I struggled. We struggled. We had a few bad hires at the beginning, people that were great people, but they just didn't have the right skill set for where we were, how small we were, and how well-rounded they really needed to be. So so somebody that can be great in a big company because they can be very specialized, it's not always the best pick for a 2-person startup where they need to wear a lot of different hats. So I listed a few of my anti-patterns, like some of the mistakes that I made when trying to hire. So first thing was asking candidates different questions, making it difficult to compare them. I mean, we'd get into the middle of a phone screen and I'd start coming up with new questions to ask people, and I had no idea basically what I was doing, and I found it very difficult to even ask questions that really could reveal the type of skills that I was looking for. Spending too long on the phone screen when it was a bad fit. So sometimes you can realize real quickly, this isn't going to work out, and I just finish out the half hour. Trying to automate the technical screening with HackerRank. So I think this is a great solution for software developers, but it's not a great solution yet for data scientists. So I would have them do, coding challenges, and it was so one we used was solve a game where you had to have forgetting the name of the game, doesn't really matter. But the point is, it was solve this game, and it was just for loops and stuff like that. And so even if somebody could solve it, it just didn't mean that they were going to be a great data scientist, but they might have good Python skills. So, and then some people would want to do it in JavaScript. And so I was like, oh, that sounds fine, language agnostic and all that stuff, but we don't use JavaScript. So, now they're going to have to learn a whole new language, basically stuff like that. So you need people that can kind of already have been there. Going too slow and losing candidates, competitors, when you're trying to do all the work yourself and then make time for hiring, a day or two slips, and then somebody else is moving faster and they pick them up. Going too fast in hiring because we needed someone now. Did that a couple times. So you can't just hire because you need help. You can't go slow and only choose the perfect person because they'll find something else to do. So there's a lot of balance here, and there's a lot of ways to make mistakes. There's 1,000 ways to make mistakes. It's very difficult to do it the right way. But eventually we got some big wins and we got a really great team. And so here were some of the themes of the people that we did hire and stuck with us for a while. No background in real estate. Nobody had ever done anything in real estate. Worked on coding projects or Kaggle competitions in their spare time. So they just like doing this for fun. You can do anything in your spare time. And if you're doing Kaggle, that's a good sign. Degrees in economics, computer science, physics, engineering. They're all slightly technical. Economics is probably the least technical, but none of these are really data science, and you can't really get an undergrad degree in data science. So, that wasn't very predictive, what their degree was in. Wide age range, sometimes young people were better, sometimes older people were better. Wide working experience. We had people that had PhDs in physics, and we had people that had been data scientists at insurance companies. So lots of different experiences. Couldn't predict who would complete the take-home challenge. I talked to one guy, I probably sent 5 or 10 emails back and forth of him asking questions about how to approach the problems, and then he just never did it. Other people, you'd give it to them, they'd give it back to you the next day. And I'm like, how'd you do this in one night? So also couldn't predict who would accept the offer. Some people, I thought they were very, very into it. They took something else, and vice versa. But I think the most important thing in who we hired was that each team member had a superpower. And so I think when you're building a team, you really got to not focus on weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. Not everybody has superpowers. And the superpowers really have to align with what you need on the team at the time when you're hiring that person. And so kind of what I mean by that is the best and worst performers actually have way more in common than the average performers. And so there's this book called First Break All the Rules. And what they talk about in the book is that you can't look at somebody who's a failure and then take the opposite. The reason for this is that success and failure are pretty similar in how people perform. And so they give a number of different examples. And my favorite example in the book, they give one from nursing, they give one from sales, they give one from management. But I like the sales one because nobody wants to do cold calls, right? So like, what makes an amazing salesperson? Well, the worst salespeople and the best salespeople actually both get super scared right before they make the call. And the reason is because the person that's the great salesperson takes it super personally, and they don't want to be rejected. So they get super nervous. They want to make sure that they have it all dialed in, and they really care about making the sale. So they get a little nervous. The worst performers, they stop there, but the best performers actually have another talent, which is they enjoy confrontation. And that sounds weird, but what it means is that they enjoy the debate. They enjoy like trying to overcome the obstacles, the objections. When people say no, what do they mean? Like, is it no now? Is it no, period? So they get into they engage with the person and they really enjoy that process. Whereas the average performer, they just run through the script. They cross their fingers, they hope it works. And so this was like super mind-blowing to me, because it's like the best people and the worst people are more correlated than the average performers. And you'd think, well, if I can get this big team and we can move people from B player to A player, like it just doesn't really work like that. And so I've seen it in my own team where like they won't engage on a project. They're just not into it. They just don't think it's a good idea. You can't really get them to try very hard. But the people that just like keep slugging away, they never really have those like aha breakthroughs. So this is where it's like, the complexity of the team is quite interesting. So you want to find people that are like super passionate about it and will quit over something because they care. So in the book, they kind of summarize it as, you can't teach talent. Like, you can't teach somebody to have a super strong opinion. You can't teach somebody to like feel the emotion of other people. You can't like teach empathy. You can't teach people to revel in the confrontation. Like, we would have a sprint planning, and some people would be like, okay, like that's my task. And then other people would like really want to argue about like, this is a dumb idea. Like, this isn't going to work. We don't like it. And at the beginning, it feels like, this person's like fighting me. But you realize very quickly that if you are right, they'll get on board, right? They'll get into it. They'll be like, okay, now I see how you mean that. And if you're wrong, you should know, like you want to know. So it's much better to have people tell you the truth. And, we're in LA, there's celebrities everywhere. You get a lot of yes men, right? People just want to hang around. Whatever you say, like, you're right. Those people are pretty dangerous. So I think you want the same thing in your data science team. You want people that will argue with you. And so you have to select for talent like these. And so kind of at the end of the process, I kind of started to see where I had gone right and where I had gone wrong in the interviewing process. Like, how do you actually tease these things out? How do you tease out, you could ask a question, something like, what was the time when your boss was wrong and you were right? And, people are like, oh, never say anything bad about your previous job. Never talk poorly about, a previous team or something like that. And there's some truth to that. You don't want to, some people always have something bad to say because they're always on the wrong side of, the team, and they're difficult people. And then other times, they're very passionate and they care a lot about it and they have very strong opinions and they remember. So being able to like figure this out is very complicated, and it's very challenging to build a team, but at the same time, it's very fun. So in conclusion, growing 150-fold. So that was a little bit of clickbait right there. We went from one client to 150, and we're adding more. But basically, we started with a MacBook and a CSV file, and by using the right tools, using the right processes, and then finding the right people, we were able to grow. And so I think the order is very important in how you approach that problem. All right, so here's a link. You can join my newsletter, and I'm working on a book, like an ebook on this topic. So if you sign up, I'll send you guys a free copy of it when I'm done. Any questions? Yep.
What are some of the superpowers of your current team? What do you mean by that?
So I would say like, yeah. So the question was, what are some of the superpowers of my team? So, so one guy I found out like maybe a month after he started was like doing a Kaggle competition, and he had bought a GPU, and he was trying to like do some like hyperopt tuning and stuff like this on the weekends. And so basically like that type of passion, I asked him like to start working on that for our product. And so he was like, I didn't know that he was interested in that. And that was like a little farther down on the roadmap. So he just started doing it on his own, even though it didn't like really fit with where we are in the product cycle. So I would say just like initiative and creativity. And another superpower was like somebody on our team joined. It was like an innocence project. And so it was like, how do we use data to try and like mine this? So it's when you see people that like are very interested in the tools and the concepts behind it, and then they can bring in the things that they're learning in their spare time back into the team. I would say those are two of the superpowers. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on how to build that data-driven culture within organizations that are not sort of technically heavy or bought into the data mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was how to bring in a data-driven mindset into an organization that isn't necessarily technical. I think, at the beginning, my co-founder is a little bit less technical than I am. Well, he's a lot less technical. But at the beginning, we struggled a little bit with the OKRs because they require like a lot of commitment, and then they require measurement. So you actually have to do a lot of work to even just measure what you're doing. And so that's where like in tracking our model performance, we had to go and find ML flow. And we were trying some different solutions before that, but we needed a place where we could track this, where everybody could see it. So that burned up a couple cycles, for a person or two. There definitely has to be like a buy-in and a commitment, because there is an added cost to operating in this way. I think a lot of the benefits are deferred, so you don't really necessarily see them until later. But I think like I would say that buy-in, if you can get the buy-in, you can start moving in that direction. But if you try to like put the cart before the horse and start just implementing some of these things without people like really buying into it, they'll get neglected. People will get pulled off of it. They'll get reallocated to something else, and it'll just fall on its face. Yeah.
It seemed like when you were talking about the hiring process, you were emphasizing moving quickly and kind of not spending the full half hour if you knew they weren't right, and some things that you can't teach people, so look for these kind of talents. So how does that change, or how do you approach that after somebody is hired, you've already hired them, and then you start to see weaknesses, or you see that they didn't have the talent you thought? Are you kind of in the mindset of like fire quickly, or?
We hired one person, and I had to let her go after 9 days. I had done such a poor job interviewing, and they had gone through a boot camp. And so I took for granted that they knew how to do a lot of stuff. Other than that, I've only had to let one other person go. I mean, it's a great question. I think the hire fast, fire fast thing, it's like a little bit of a cliche, and they're real people, and it's like, if you're kind of just burning through people, that's not really like the best strategy. So I think another thing I think is like making somebody productive can have a lot to do with, so it kind of goes back to that Deming quote of 85% of the problems have to do with like the wrong processes for the team. So what I found was that when we had more platform tools, when we had more, when we had kind of built out the structure of the team, people could be way more productive faster. So it was sort of like we would hire people. So we hired some junior people, but we hired them a little too early. So they couldn't really make the platform tools, and they weren't there yet to use them. So they weren't super productive, but it just kind of helped me see that we needed tooling. Like tooling was very important. And so hired some contractors to build up the tools. Once we had those, then the people became more productive. It doesn't exactly answer your question, but everybody that I let go, I wish I had let them go faster. Like I waited too long. Do you guys know Gary Vaynerchuk? I saw him on Snapchat or something. He was, doing his thing. And he said he fired one guy after one day. It took him a year to actually let him go, but in his head, he had fired him. And he's like, I regretted it. And he goes, I would wake up in the morning and I'd think about firing the guy and I'd say, I got to give him another chance. And he goes, it was torture. It was so torture. It really weighs on you. And you have this guy like Gary Vee, right, who's super flamboyant, super outspoken, and he's afraid to sit down with an employee and let him go. And he said, but he cost that guy a year because the guy never really was productive, and the guy could have been doing something else. And so, I think it's one of those things where it's sensitive. You want to be kind. You want to give people a chance, but there's also just timing, right? They maybe would be good later, but they're not good at this stage. And especially if you're small, I think people can hide in big organizations pretty easily. There's no hiding in a 3-person company. It's a different beast. So, yeah.
Here's a two-part question. Converse of what he just asked, has it happened that somebody who you hired came up to you after realizing that this was not a good fit for him? Second, how did you handle that situation?
That's never happened. I think people, I think people quit jobs for a lot of reasons. I maybe just don't have a big enough sample size. But I think, if that were to happen, what I would do is I would thank them for coming up to me, because I think we don't have that much time on the planet. And so I think everybody has something that they can be great at. So I think to kind of waste your time in an organization like that, it's, it's embarrassing to get fired. But it's also I think it's a pretty strong move just to say this isn't working out for me. And so I want to go do something else and sort of take that risk. But if somebody did that, I would say hey, let's figure out a transition period. Let's find you, you can start finding another job and we'll figure out how to make that work, because I think there'd be a certain level of honesty of that person. So I would want to respect that and help them transition out. Yeah.
What sort of cultural, working, and organizational differences did you see going from working at HMT to working as an S9 at Facebook to working as the leader of a data organization?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is skin in the game. So I would say all my stages have always had a certain level of skin in the game. When I was in HFT, if the trades didn't work, we didn't make any money. So it was there was some pressure there. And then at Facebook, you have this huge scale. And when I started, I think there was 10,000 people in the company. And when I left, there was 18,000. And so, there's 1 billion users or whatever. So you have this ratio of users to people. So you have a lot of levers you can pull. The data set's incredible. They kind of track everything. We kind of know that now, but yeah. So I would say my favorite by far has been the startup, because it's so much more challenging. You have to be full stack everything, right? Every decision you make matters to the business. And so it's more engaging. There's more skin in the game. It's more fun, in my opinion, but it's definitely harder. Starting something from scratch is hard. Yeah. Yep.
When you're building your team, everybody's shooting for the passionate A players, but there's also B and C players. Did you come up with an ideal mix for your organization about how to balance that?
That's a great question. So, do you guys know the movie Moneyball, or the book, Michael Lewis? I think that's the best model for hiring. What everybody thinks is predictive is really not that predictive. So if somebody says they went to Harvard, everybody has this concept right now in their head of like, oh, Harvard. But our team is like, I would say like, if I knew one thing like about a person and it was like, did they do a Kaggle competition or not? Like, I don't even really care how they score. Like, I would probably prefer that person to the other person if that was my only thing I knew about them. So I would just say that I really like Moneyball just because there's a lot of biases and preconceived notions that have nothing to do with race or gender, but have everything to do with like, educational background and like corporate experience and stuff like that. Like you could have somebody that could be a killer at a big company and they'd be terrible in a startup. So it just has really very little to do with, resume or pedigree and all that stuff. And I think the other thing is like, you guys all know WordPress and Matt Mullenweg. So he has a whole thing he talks about where they don't hire people through interviews. They just don't interview people. They onboard everybody and give them a trial, period. And they pay everybody $25 an hour for the hours that they work. So his point is like, we're distributed. Like even if you're a great developer, some people like to be distributed and some people want to be in an office. So like people need, there's so many different variables just to the organization that you just don't know if somebody's gonna be good. And so instead of like hiring somebody, you give them a tryout, right? And so they're kind of on the team and let them go from there. So I think there's a lot of people that have done a lot of good thinking on this topic, but yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting challenge. Yeah. All right. Sounds good. All right, thank you. Thanks, guys.